Hello, everyone. Welcome again to another episode of Bios and Bookmarks powered by the NGC Bocas Lit Fest. I'm Shivani Ramlochan, and I'm really happy today to have a guest with us who's new to both the Bocas Lit Fest family and the Bios and Bookmarks family. Please give a warm welcome to Sheena Kamal. Sheena,
Hi.
welcome.
Hello, everyone.
It's really good to have you here with us. And in a different circumstances, we'd be greeting you in what is right now very sunny Trinidad. But I have to say I'm
You're
grateful
making
for
it so
Zoom.
terrible for me right
I'm
now,
so
like in
sorry.
Canada, just being like, no, why
No,
couldn't I be there?
I'm so sorry about that. I know. I should probably in my notes just avoid all mention of the actual climate here. I'm gonna note to
Yes.
self for the next season. So Shayna is joining us from not quite so sunny Toronto. And I am a big fan of Sheena's crime thriller series, the Nora Watts novels. Let me tell you a little bit about her and the books before I invite Sheena to read. Her best selling debut, The Lost Ones, won her a Kobo Emerging Writer Prize, a Strand Critics Award, and McCavity Award for Best First Novel. The sequel, It All Falls Down, has been called a stunning, emotionally resonant thriller in its Kirkus starred review, No Going Back, and her first YA novel, Fight Like a Girl, are both released in 2020. Gina, without further ado, I turn it over to you for your first reading.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Shivani. This has been it's really wonderful to get this invitation. I've not done a Trinidad event before, and this is really exciting for me. I'm going to read from my debut novel, The Lost Ones. And this book is set in Vancouver, the west coast of Canada, and it's about a woman who discovers that the child she'd given up for adoption many years ago has gone missing. And now she's got to delve into her very dark past in order to figure out just what happened to this missing girl, who is a child she's not sure she wanted to exist in the first place. It's very dark, very atmospheric, and it's a thriller. Yep. So I'm going to read right now from the first chapter, which is the first thing that I actually wrote. This is the first novel that I've ever written, but this chapter is the first time that I had really put down a work of fiction on the page. And I used to write screenplays before, but it's not quite the same thing. So what you're about to hear right now is kind of like the inception of me as a writer. The call comes in just after 5 a.m. I'm immediately on guard because everyone knows that nothing good ever happens this early. Not with a phone call, anyway. You never get word that a wealthy relative has passed and is leaving you his inheritance before 9 a.m. It's fortunate then that I'm already awake and on my second cup of coffee, so I'm at least moderately prepared. I've just come back from my walk where I leaned over the edge of the seawall and contemplated water that is calm and gray, just like the city itself at this time of year. As usual, I tried to see the warm, dark current that flows from Japan and turns into the North Pacific, tempering the cold and spreading its tepid fingers to the coastline. And as usual, it refused me the pleasure. Vancouver. Some people say it's beautiful here, but they've never idled in the spaces that I call home. They've never been down to Hastings Street, filled with its needles and junkies. They've never considered the gray sky and gray water for months on end as rain pours down in an unsuccessful attempt at cleansing. Then comes summer, and it's so hot that you can roast marshmallows on the fires that burn through the forests in the province. Summer right on the coast is nice enough, but still several months away when my phone rings. I stare at the unfamiliar number on my call display, and after a moment of hesitation, decline to take it. Several seconds later, it rings again. I'm intrigued. I answer, if only because I've always admired persistence in a caller. Hello? There's a long pause after the person on the other end explains in a hoarse voice why he's calling. The pause becomes awkward. I can tell the caller is fighting himself, wanting to say more, but knowing this is a bad idea. No one wants to talk to a rambler over the phone, especially one you've never met before. I imagine the caller sweating on the other end. Maybe his hands have gone clammy. The phone slips from his grasp and I hear it clatter on the ground. He swears for a full 30 seconds as he struggles to pick it back up and regain his composure. You still there? Did you hear what I said? He asks. Yeah, I heard, I say, when the silences become excruciating. I'll be there. And then I hang up. I've never heard the name Everett Walsh before, but according to him, I may know something about a missing girl. He does not tell me what, though. I consider not meeting him, but he sounds desperate, and if there's one thing that draws me more than persistence, it's desperation. Even though finding people is part of what I do for a living, what would I possibly know about a missing girl to warrant a call at this hour? His desperation is so fresh and raw, I can almost taste it. There you go. Chapter 1, The Lost Ones, my debut novel.
Thank you so much for that, Sheena. I want to begin in what is probably a simple place, but to me seems pretty important for thinking about the genesis of a crime writer's career who's written about the same woman in various parts of her life with such intensity and darkness. I mean, you said before that the character of Nora came to you without too much preponderance or deep meditation about it beforehand. But I'm really interested in knowing if she's continued to manifest in much the same ways, or are there now, 3 books in, different kinds of rituals, writerly or otherwise, to summon her onto the page when you need to write about her?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, she feels like a gift to me. I knew that I was going to write. I knew that I was going to write a novel, and I knew that it was going to be a crimey. And that's just because I just had that instinct, that feeling, and I love crime novels. So I didn't put too much thought into it. You're right, but I did write a line, um, or think about a line actually, and it had something to do with blues music.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as I realized that she was a blues singer, it just opened her right up to me, and I understood that. I understood what it's like to be an artist who hides their art and their light under a rock because they're scared of how people perceive them. They're scared of what kind of people that brings into their world. And as her story continues, we see her connecting through music, and music is one of the ways that she shows her heart, because she can, people have called her unlikable. They've called her, a bit of a cipher, maybe a bit abrasive, and her personality is really kind of no BS sort of thing. And her vulnerability comes through in her relationship with a dog. She has a dog, a stray, who kind of wanders into her life. And she also is an incredibly gifted singer and can tell stories with her voice, and she doesn't anymore. So whenever I need to pick her up, I'll listen to some music, some and it's not always necessarily blues music, although I do love blues music. Sometimes it's just artists with a big heart. So I will listen to blues. I'll listen to Big Mama Thornton. I listen to what's funny? Actually, there's a lot of calypsos that I would listen to, because there's a storytelling element to calypso that I have always found really fascinating. But yeah, so music is a really big influence on me as a writer. I don't know if I answered your question. Did I answer your question?
Yes,
Okay.
definitely. And what this conveys to me is that we have to get Nora to Trinidad right now, like into the heart of Carnival. I would,
She'd
I
die.
would, I would be very interested to see how she'd navigate that space.
I think she would die. I think she would just be like, what is going on? I've never been to Carnival, actually. Isn't that sad?
You know what it is? It is a harbinger of your future carnival self, and we are going to get a very carnival infused novel in this series. I can now feel that. That's the premonition that I have for you and for Nora Watts
Okay.
already in this bios and bookmarks. And I mean, entering the crime thriller genre often feels like, from an outsider who does not write books in that world, but who very much enjoys reading them, like entering a space that is heavily fueled with not just testosterone and venerated male writers, but also really solid ideas about what writing the female body in crime fiction should look like and sound like. And we're so often beset with the bullet riddled, mangled, gory corpses of female victims. There's a way in which the Nora Watts books seem to strongly contradict the necessity for that. And Nora herself, so much could be said about her flaws, but it's her complicated strength that really resonates off of every page. And in writing the what is now trilogy, how conscious did it feel to move away from a very male-oriented look of violence and in that way of portraying the female body?
Yeah. Well, I made it personal. I made it intimate. These are things that happens to a woman and then how she processes it. So her, we meet her in the Lost Ones as someone who has experienced a trauma met like 15 years ago and has not healed from it. And the entire story is about her coming to terms with that journey, with that healing, and realizing that maybe she needs it. And she is a mother, but she's never wanted to be a mother. And her dealing with that, and the fact that there is a child out there with her DNA, and how complicated that is for her. So I really, when I'm writing her, I try to make it personal. I do write first person present tense, so it feels like everything's happening to you, the reader. Um, and crime fiction is a testosterone filled genre, but it's actually slowly being overtaken by women. If you notice, a lot of the crime books that are making the big lists and things like that are, I mean, they're domestic suspense about white ladies, and that's the reality of what that is. But women's voices are being heard more and more in crime fiction, and they're actually doing some of the best work. Like, there's a book that blew my mind. I think it was last year I read it. My Sister, the Serial Killer. Um, a woman writer out of Nigeria, and it's astonishing, right? And so I really do think that women are who love mysteries and who love crime novels are looking at violence that are enacted upon the female body in these works of fiction, and in turn, and like actually flipping these scripts.
I mean, of course, that book, My Sister, the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Brathwaite, I think it is.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you. It's encouraging and instructive to see the ways in which the genre can evolve, and most noticeably, doesn't need permission to evolve from any external validating canon. And in the ways in which the Nora Watts books are paced as well seems to be its own very intentional act of skill and technique. In No Going Back, for example, it feels that for those of us who've had experience with Nora before, you're catapulted into the action. It's very forward momentum. Nora takes, one could say, an almost aggressive stance almost immediately from the first page, that without giving too much away, she is a woman who is on a mission. That mission is very strongly tied to her daughter, with whom she has, to say it's a complex relationship would be putting it mildly. But how did you contend with any struggles or any challenges in pacing and plotting and the narrative structure of the third book, which always seemed to be on the go and amped up intensity as the narrative continued?
Yeah, I mean, the third book was really hard to write. It was the hardest of the three to write. And I don't know why exactly that is, but I think I'd set up a showdown. essentially. In the first two books, we're leading towards kind of a looming threat for the third one, and I wanted it to feel propulsive. Um, so yeah, so that, I mean, that definitely was intentional, and the way that I did it was just to focus on her fear. She's scared for her daughter, not for herself. She doesn't, like most parents, they don't really care about them, or most mothers anyway, they don't really care about themselves. It's like, okay, but my child is in danger.
Mm-hmm.
And so and in that, it is a continuation of her reckoning with motherhood, and that she's put the child in danger through her own, not, it's not her fault, but through her own even existence in the world, um, makes her feel like she's a little bit of an avenging angel in that way. So yeah, so the all three books are about this very complicated mother-daughter relationship, and even when her daughter Bonnie is not present on the page, she's always present in her minds. And writing that is pretty complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Writing that dynamic does take a lot. Like, these are very emotionally draining books to write. And I definitely, when I wrote the Lost Ones, I didn't, I'm a self-taught writer. I haven't taken classes. I haven't done the courses. I haven't, been schooled on how you take care of yourself, how other, I haven't really seen other writers in how they take care of themselves mentally, emotionally after completing a book. And so I've had to, over the years, find ways to cope with, like, sometimes how intense it is to be in her head, and to write, right? And to write violence. It takes a lot.
I think that's, you bringing that up is so instructive. And I also believe something that is not that openly discussed in the crime, thriller, and horror genres, which are often thought of as money concerned fields.
Yeah.
So it's almost as if the writer, Caribbean or otherwise, is being told by the external market, you're doing this for money anyway. You don't really get to complain about the effect it has on you, which of course is complete nonsense. And I think discussing this now is showing how much need for care and self tenderness there is in this process. And perhaps, for those of us who are new to the Nora Watts books, you might say, and you may disagree with me when you put your hands on the books, which of course you should do because they're great. The books could be said to get progressively darker. Like, the
Yeah.
stakes do not relent for Nora. The situations don't get halcyon colored, and there are no tidy or sweet summary explanations. I think, in fact, that's something you do really well across all three books, even though from book to book, central conflicts are kind of resolved with varying levels of satisfaction. I've never ended any book thinking, okay, Nora is now able to ride off into the sunset.
Yeah.
Everything is fixed. The next book is going to be Paradise Island, and she's going to have the time of her life.
And she falls in love with the pool boy, and like, yeah, I want that for her. I would love that for her. I don't know how she would deal with it necessarily, though. I think, No Going Back is the last book, and I haven't written any other Nora books, so if I ever do pick her back up, I definitely would want her to be, thank you, I would want to move her to a slightly different place, although, you know doing that, and also keeping that strong voice, that strong sense of self, strong sense of self. What am I trying to say? But the books were written about darkness and a dark period and all these things, and so if I were to take her to paradise, um, and give her the pool boy, like, what does that look like? Um, and I do actually go to Indonesia in No Going Back,
Mhm.
uh, to write off some tax expenses for my trip to Indonesia. Should I say that? Probably not. Um,
We won't tell. It's not like this
yeah,
is live or anything. Don't worry.
yeah, no, for sure. No one's gonna know. But yeah, like I do take her to a tropical place, and she does not do
Mhm.
very well. Uh, yeah,
No, she does struggle a little, and considering, at that point in the book, the stakes are very high. Danger is literally, at that point,
yeah.
it feels like over every shoulder. But I
Mhm.
think what's really important about what Nora doesn't do in that place is exotify it. And of course she wouldn't, because if anyone, anyone who's spent any time with this character knows that she herself has felt so frequently othered in Canada, where the proposition of fitting in or assimilating or being at peace with all your neighbors is not as simple and straightforward as people might think. And you have said before that you have your own experience with that sense of otherness. And do you think that writing the books has been a way to confront that or therapize it or deal with it? Or does it remain just as complex?
I mean, yeah, being the other is always a complex thing. So, I was born in Trinidad, and I moved to Canada when I was 6, and had that immigrant experience. So I was put in ESL, English as a second language, even though I'm from Trinidad and English is my first language. Um, it definitely was a culture shock, and I think my personality changed, and I became more introverted when I moved to Canada, and so um, definitely the sense of otherness has made me solitary in a lot of ways, and sort of like kind of a little bit apart, not sure,
Mhm.
because I am Indo-Caribbean. I present as Indian, and a lot of people kind of think that, but being here or being in Canada, you interact with a lot of people who are from India and don't consider us to be Indian. So I remember in my novel Fight Like a Girl, which is about a Trinidadian, someone from the Trinidadian diaspora, she has some Indian friends, and she asks them, these Desis that she would sit at lunch with, and she would ask them, well, like am I Indian to you? And they were like, no, you're kind of black. And that's the truth. That's how Indian people from India largely view us. But you are aware of like the Indo-Caribbean culture. That's not, that can to some people be a huge insult, right?
Mhm.
Due to a lot of bias, which I think is terrible, and I don't agree with. So it's that sense of like, are you this, are you that, like what exactly, is people switching their voices, right? So there are people who immigrate that um, get rid of their accents, but their true selves speak with an accent. And
Mhm.
so it's being other definitely is complicated. And for Nora, she's part Indigenous, and part her mom is from, and that's a reveal in the second book, so I won't say where, but her mom is an immigrant, and she's had a very complicated upbringing. And if you know anything about Canada, the Indigenous people in Canada have not been historically treated very well, and there's been an attempted cultural genocide and an actual attempted genocide. The
Mhm.
last residential school in Canada closed in the mid 1990s. Um, in BC, which is where I write for The Lost Ones. So, we have a very complicated relationship with colonialism, with othering people. And so I definitely wanted to bring that to her character to show that Canada isn't this happy place where it's like, a free for all, or, there is extreme bias here. And there is a need to really engage with this idea of otherness, because it's the history of our country that has not really been um, dealt with appropriately. So I think it's important for immigrants to engage with this idea of how Indigenous peoples of this land were treated, and have that reckoning, because we do, as immigrants, have this sense of otherness as well. But there's an otherness on the other side of it too. So um, for these books, I definitely wanted to look at the idea of the Canadian dream,
Mhm.
and talk about who it's for and who it's not for. And by sort of putting these two identities in this one character, I was able to kind of toe that line and explore.
I mean, I think you're showing from the outset that belonging or not belonging is not a simple proposition,
No.
and that it's more or less simple when the genre is high stakes crime. like these issues of identity and the complexity of belonging in a complex place do not shift automatically because one is writing genre fiction. I mean, there are ways in which the books implicitly stand up for themselves from the very beginning that you can't help but root for. And audience members, you'll see this when you start the trilogy. We have a brilliant question from Rebel Woman Lit, and they'd like to know, do you consider how readers feel when reading violence in your books? Is a reader's healing process considered or no?
Hmm.
It's a good
I,
one.
it is a good question. I because because The Lost Ones was my first novel, and it was a hope and a dream to even get it published. I did not consider readers necessarily because I didn't know that I would have any readers.
Mhm.
So I write for myself, and that is a habit that kind of it exists even today. I really write for myself. So it's more, for me, it's more about staying true to the character and the journey that I'm taking the character on. And um, I know that there are books that have trigger warnings and that are more careful. That is not my work, although I am thinking about it more and more. Um, Given that I do have more of an audience now, but really it's about, I'm trying to tell a story about, and all of my work is about, like one character and what that person goes through, really. And I've got to stay true to the heart of that and the voice of that. And I find that with publishing, it's easy to let so many other people in your head. And that's always a recipe for disaster for me.
Mhm.
Although I am, like, just to answer your question, I am now thinking about it a little bit more, um, but I can't make any promises. Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a way in which, by handling Nora's story with so much implicit care, despite or in spite of what she's been through, there's a way in which you have been concerned with how readers react to it, which is different from writing for a reader's response or around a reader's trauma. But because the books have always been so engaged in what it means to be a person living at the intersection of so many hurts and traumas, in my opinion, your approach has always been so considered and so sensitive, more so than many other books in this genre. So, all that to say, I don't think you need to beat yourself up. I think Nora feels completely authentic from the moment that we meet her. And then that sense of herself struggling ultimately with herself more than any external force only deepens. It doesn't let up, but it also takes care in the same space.
Well, thank you for that. Thanks. That's a lovely thing to hear.
I think it's a good point to, in thinking about what other kinds of books have done important work, to bring up again the 100 Caribbean Books That Made Us project, which is also a project here at the NGC Bocas Lit Fest that we're really proud of. It's a response to a BBC list of 100 novels that shaped our world, which had very few Caribbean titles. And that prompted us at the festival to think about which Caribbean books have really made a tremendous impact on the consciousness of Caribbean readers and international readers around the world. Soon, we will be releasing that official list of 100. But I want to invite you, Sheena, to let us know which Caribbean book in any genre or books really profoundly impacted you and helped make you, Sheena, the writer, reader, and person.
Well, that's a really good question. I'm not that familiar with tons of Caribbean literature, and I think it's an accessibility thing. It is a not knowing thing. But the book that comes to my mind is Book of Night Women by Marlon James, whom I love. I adore his work. And his work is uncompromising. It is unflinching. It is so
Mhm.
compelling. The voices that he writes with, are just so completely immersive. So the Book of Night Women, is set in the Caribbean, and it follows a character named Lilith, um, in the time plantation times, and yeah, it's absolutely it's a stunning novel. It's a wonderful novel. Yeah, so he's one of my favorite writers. I would say definitely one of his books, and that one in particular is really stands out for me.
Thank you for that. It's an excellent book, like you say. And for those of us tuning in, if you want to know if the Book of Night Woman made it onto the list of 100 Caribbean books that made us, you have to stay tuned. Um, and that will be revealed in due course. I think what we're most proud of is that that list of books has been has had its genesis in being decided by you, the audience, the sharing and reading and thinking public around the world. And thank you, Sheena, for letting us know which one makes your list or is at the top of it. I think at this point, I would like to invite you to read a second time for us, if you don't mind.
Not at all. Okay, so I'm going to read from No Going Back, which is the third book in the Nora Watts series. And in this book, Nora realizes that there is a shadowy figure from her past who is hunting her. And he not only threatens her life, but the life of her teenage daughter, who she has a very complicated relationship with. And so this novel is very high stake thriller, and it's about Nora's. It's a chase novel. It's about Nora's, I guess, her need to protect this daughter with whom she has this very tenuous and complicated relationship. So I'm going to read not exactly the beginning, but from near the beginning of the book. And just to set it up a little bit, she's on her way back from Detroit, and she stops into Toronto because she needs to see this girl. And her daughter, Bonnie, lives in Toronto now, had moved. And Nora goes there with this sense of she wants to connect. This is the part in her journey where she realizes this girl matters to me, this person matters to me, I want to connect. It's fall in Toronto, the season only just beginning to turn frigid, which is what may have affected the sudden chill in Bonnie's posture. She's a teenager, but all the self-importance and spitfire that go with that age have momentarily deserted her. We're standing in front of each other, this girl and I, for the first time in our lives, face to face, and neither of us is unconscious. An improvement. She's leaner than she'd been a year ago, at least from what I saw in photos. Tougher, too, given the suspicious look she threw in my direction when she first saw me, before she recognized me. Oh, those eyes. There's no denying they are mine, dark and fathomless. I try to read her, but I can't. This is normally what I'm very good at. Observing people, seeing what's beneath their surfaces, what they keep buried. But Bonnie remains a mystery. Some people say that you can never know your children, which might be true. There's so much I want to say to this young woman, this teenager. Nora, is this about the tattoo? Bonnie says to cover her shock. What tattoo? She doesn't answer for a moment. Then her voice, low with urgency, she tells me about the tattoo that she remembers from the time she was kidnapped over a year ago. I can't get it out of my head. I draw it all the time. It makes me feel like I did back then when they took me. Like someone's always watching, she says. Have you told your parents about this? She shakes her head. No, it's just a feeling, right? I don't want to freak my mom out. She's scared, but doesn't want anyone else to be. This caution, the instinct for silence. I guess there must be some connection between us after all. All of my hopes of what this reunion could be fall away, and now I'm scared too. Though my fear means almost nothing. I've lived with it for far too long. It has made a home inside me, and I've come to expect it. No, it's her fear that's a travesty. I've made a powerful enemy, but it hadn't occurred to me that he would be keeping an eye on Bonnie. But it should have. I tell her there's nothing to worry about, that I'll look into the origins of this tattoo for her. And then I leave before she can ask any questions. I stay in Toronto for a few days at a motel on the east end of the city. It's close enough for me to keep an eye on the sleek townhouse that Bonnie shares with her adoptive mother, Lynn. I watch, but don't see anything suspicious yet. It means I have some time. I can't stay here if I'm going to look for the man who's made my daughter scared for her life, the one who was behind the attack on Nate Marlowe. She doesn't know that he's after me, and she sure as hell doesn't know that I'm going to find him first. No going back.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, as I listen to you read, I'm struck by the fact that you've lived with Nora Watts for a long time now. And you may have hinted that her journey might just be about done. I know people have asked you before, are we going to see a Nora Watts part 4? And I have not read of you fully committing to that. But when you think of Nora's future, on or off the page, is there anything that she has never quite achieved or realized that you want for her, whether or not that makes it into print?
Yeah, happiness in the pool boy. That's what I want for her.
I love how the pool boy is integral to this scenario.
He's such an important part of my imagination at this time. I don't know. But yeah, I do absolutely want her to be happy. And I feel like I've tortured her enough in these books, and maybe to continue writing her. I love her voice, and it would be wonderful to take her to a different place, but I don't know if that's really possible at this time.
I mean, we're gonna cross our fingers now for this elusive pool boy who at this point I feel almost deserves a side novella. I'm really intrigued
for sure. It's like,
by the possibility.
Just be like 50 Shades. Quite the departure. Yeah, that's like the different direction I'm going to take her in.
You know what? I am fully here for it. I have to say it's an unlooked for diversion on the path, but I support it. I believe in happy endings when they come. And there is a way in which so many books of highbrow literary fiction are really concerned with how we care for each other or don't. And it's something that is very much at the heart of this crime thriller series, which again does not exclude itself from thinking about serious and galvanizing concepts. There's a point in No Going Back when I was reading it the first time through that I thought, oh, what's actually happening here is that Nora is holding everyone at arm's length, not because she wants to be selfish or thinks she's a complete badass, but the idea of herself as the toxic one has started to pervade her thoughts, and she's so concerned with the harm that will befall other people, you know, Bonnie primarily, but also the other characters in the book if they get too close. It really made me want to comfort her, kind of reach in and give her a hug.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. Me too. That's why I want the pool boy for her, you know. That's why I keep coming back to this pool boy. No, but it's true. She has been through a lot, and people in her life get hurt. Mm-hmm. And you know, maybe sometimes it's her fault, maybe sometimes it's not. She doesn't know how to be a good friend. She doesn't know how to be a good community member because so little of that care has been shown to her. And so how can someone who is so that damaged know how to have healthy relationships and healthy friendships? That's definitely at the heart of her.
And she's moving through a complex landscape in No Going Back, but in the other and first two books as well. And I think that's something the trilogy does with great attention, is to show that Canada, the external understanding of Canada as one, a hyper likable place, and two, as a monolith of Canadianness, that both of those things are extremely untrue. And that Toronto does not affect Nora in the same way that Vancouver does. And that's for very specific reasons that maybe if I explain those too much, it might veer into spoiler territory. But suffice it to say that she doesn't move across the landmass with one static emotion. And I feel like that must have been an important thing for you to convey across the three books.
Convey, I'm not sure I understand.
The idea that Canada is not a monolith of
Oh
same.
yeah, for sure. Canada's a really interesting country, and from a crime writing perspective, it's very rich.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of material here, and people don't think that there's crime in Canada, but there absolutely is. We do have organized crime here. We do have huge inequalities that manifest itself through crime. And so I definitely wanted to tackle this idea of Canada and all these myths about Canada, because it can be a really wonderful place. I'm not saying like
Mm-hmm.
it isn't. I'm a Canadian citizen, and I love the opportunities that this country has provided for me, and I'm absolutely grateful to them. But I also, it's important, I think, to not keep the blinders on. There is work to be done in this country. I reckoning with our past, and also reckoning with how we're moving forward in the future. As we've watched the downfall of the American empire, and there were a lot of Canadians here being like, oh, look at us, oh, Americans, like, your emotional support Canadians are on standby. Well,
Mm-hmm.
actually, those emotional support Canadians should be taking a look at our own country as well, because we've got work to do. The Proud Boys started here,
Mm-hmm.
like that's something that people don't talk about. So I definitely am inspired by this country, and through Nora's journey, am inspired to take a look at some of these difficult issues affecting Canada.
I love that you put it in those terms, because I think the answer to a possible question about whether Trinidad's criminality gets into your books might be a no. But then it's very clear from what you've just said that the actual lived criminality, historical and social crime, and inequity of a place, like, the books are not immune to that. They're not written, Nora Watts and her concerns are not written in a vacuum to what is showing up on the headlines in the Canadian news.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that really inspired her character, and I tried to do this as sensitively as possible without appropriating, was the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women. That is something that is a huge issue in Canada. The way, the gender-based violence against Indigenous women, and violence in general against the Indigenous peoples of this land, the first people of this land. But when gender comes into play, it's even that much more, gosh, like, affecting
Mm-hmm.
to me as a woman. And so I definitely wanted to deal with that, or to at least not ignore it, right? So I do deal with, like, Canada's colonial history um, a lot in these books. Maybe I'm not selling the thriller aspect of of these things if people are into it, but my degree is in political science, and we like you said, we do not exist in a vacuum. Nora does not exist in a vacuum. We're all creatures of the society that we live in, and they make us. So definitely want to deal with those things. As for, you mentioned the criminality in Trinidad, I do touch on it a little bit in Fight Like a Girl, which is my YA novel, but just from a different, Canadian perspective, just a little tad. I put a kidnapping in there, or an attempted kidnapping in there, yeah, just for some Trini flavor. No, that was off color. No, I really would love to write Trinidad at some point, but I haven't been there in a long time. So my perspective would definitely be from the diaspora, and that's when you mentioned that, that's what I thought. Is like, I would love to, but um, having a character and place is really important. So I write Canada very specifically. There's a novel I'm working on right now that is France, set in France, and that's very specific to an experience I had there. With Trinidad, there is a little bit of a hesitancy for me, because I did immigrate so young.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to make sure that if I do ever write a novel set in Trinidad, which, let's face it, will probably be a crime novel, that I'm doing it for coming from a perspective of understanding.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that that comment was off color. I mean, it makes me think for our audience who's tuning in from all around the world, you might think these books are unrelentingly grim and depressing and maybe a little too dark to handle. But I'm here to tell you that Nora Watts is surprisingly very funny. Like, there are things that she says to herself most of the time when you least expect it that will have you in stitches. I really wanted to talk about this balancing act between writing a protagonist who is so deeply wounded and traumatized, upon whom we see multiple traumas being visited, who also is able to look at the world with humor and this sharp levity. To me, this ties in so strongly into what it means to write a powerful female protagonist in a crime thriller series. So let's talk about that a bit.
The humor, I think it wasn't planned, just how her voice comes to me, right? She is like a little voice in my head sometimes, and she is funny. There's a sometimes very dark people. They do have like a sly sense of humor that's really kind of dry, and I love her moments of levity, for sure. I've in editorial, my editor has asked me to take out some of the more outrageous stuff because I can go pretty far. But but to me, it's to show the darkness, you also have to show the light, and for her, it comes through her dog and through those little bits of humor that are completely unexpected.
Yeah, to say that they're completely unexpected is absolutely true. I was not expecting Nora to be as funny as she is. And what we might call off color actually feels to me like a totally valid way to respond to deep trauma. In Canada, in Trinidad, there's this unrelenting violence.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've been following the Trinidadian headlines recently, but we are dealing in a really direct way with femicide in our nation. And the ways that creative makers respond to that feels really important. And the only response cannot be complete seriousness. There is a way in which our society, the Caribbean society and its diaspora, has used humor long before I have any conception of it being recorded to tell hard truths. And these books absolutely do that.
Yeah, well, thank you. But just to say, some of the like what's happening in Trinidad, gosh, it is so concerning, and it is hard to have levity about dark issues.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's how people cope. That humor is one of the most compelling ways to cope with trauma, and I think that's what's happening right now with people. How else do you cope?
Mm-hmm.
And move
Absolutely.
on.
And reading work like this, which on the one hand could feel very separate from the contemporary Caribbean context, for as much as it's not set in Trinidad or in another Caribbean island, but on the other hand, really doesn't, because the things that Nora faces and also the things that she sees other women go through are so relevant and so vital to the things that women all around the world endure. And then writing about that with maybe not equal parts darkness and light, readers who are listening in will have to read the books to make their own determinations about what that balance looks like for you. But for all of the terrifying darkness in these books, there is humor and there is wit and there are things that carry you through the turbulence. And
And maybe
I'm
there's
very
going to
grateful
be,
for that.
oh, thank you. Yeah, maybe there's going to be a pool boy also. You never know.
I think the pool boy who who right now is fictional has become a hallmark of this conversation.
Yeah, I know.
Bios and bookmarks of the NGC Bocas Lit Fest. I think I love it because you never know what you're going to encounter fully. For every world that you think exists within a book, there are at least 100 more. um, Look, Nora is. I spend a lot of time thinking about her outside of the
Mm.
books, which to me is a sure sign that a character is continuing to live in my consciousness off the page, right? Entirely outside of the realm of the books as well. I often think, what would Nora Watts do? Like, what would Jesus do? How would she deal with the situation? And
She would
you
say no and walk away. That's what she would do.
certainly, like, in no going back, it feels, because of how driven she is for
Yeah.
the reasons we've talked about. Her vision is not quite tunnel, but it's very protection oriented.
Mm.
Um, and we have the rich contextualization of her past to build on. And I want to talk a bit about why it felt important to you for us to encounter Nora as someone who has been through struggles with sobriety. I mean, that's something that the other books do not shy away from, and this one doesn't either. And it seemed like a really intentional choice to show her growth and her journey on that, and also the idea that having become sober doesn't mean that one is not tempted to undo all one's hard work, to put it that way.
Yeah. Well, her substance abuse issues stem from the trauma that she's experienced. And as her life becomes increasingly difficult to manage, the temptation is there. And I think we all feel that with our own vices, whatever our vices can be, when things get tough, we want to go to those places. And because she's had such a devastating experience with substance abuse, she can't go back to that place really without serious repercussions. So I wanted to show that struggle of like, this is what trauma has done to this woman. And this is her trying to keep a handle on her life.
Yeah, thank you for that. We have Rebel Woman Lit in the Facebook conversation saying, we really need this pool boy novella or short story now. So, I mean, Sheena, you see what you've begun, right?
Yeah, right.
And a lovely comment from Carolyn Cooper, who says, in Jamaica, we say, you have to take bad things, make joke. Laughter becomes a way of transcending trauma.
Yeah.
I couldn't have said it better. And the books are also saying that.
And also masking trauma as well. Sometimes the funniest people, there's a darkness to them also. And so humor is a coping mechanism, but it also is a masking mechanism too. And I find that especially with the Trinis that I know, because Trinis love a good laugh, right? Like we love to have a good time. But and have fun at the expense of certain issues, certain things. Like
Yes.
nothing is off the table.
No,
Nothing is
nope,
off the table.
nothing.
And it's hilarious, but also there's a sense there as well of like, okay, what does this come from? Because there are hurtful things underneath the humor sometimes, and you're just like, okay, I'm not. How do you engage necessarily, right? So where in what spirit is this humor?
Yeah, absolutely. Nora feels very much at the center of that equation as well, for all that she is not Trinidadian. So maybe there are things that slip into the bloodstream of the writing, things that
Yeah.
we are never fully able to escape, no matter what genre we write in. I mean, the theme for this season of Bios and Bookmarks is crime and wonderment. And it has been, this episode is no exception. I think it fits in really seamlessly with the others, and showing the ways in which we use crime writing and also speculative fiction to tell things that might otherwise seem unsayable. And there are
Mhm.
often more connections between those two worlds than we can imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a point in which, in No Going Back, Nora says, thank God, I'm not sure how much more masculine intervention I can take. It's one of my
don't
favorite
you don't
things.
you feel that though sometimes in your life you're just like, all right. Like,
Yes, yes, to
so
be
many dudes
diplomatic,
speaking. Yeah.
yes. And for all that, there's a way in which you, as her creator, really foreground her and center her in the heart of each book. She has male people who, to put it mildly, do not wish her well at all. there's also male support for her. I'm thinking in No Going Back, of course, of Lamb and Brazuca, but the choices that she makes ultimately are always her own. And I love seeing Brazuca's perspectives that so solidify the sense of who she is in his eyes as this completely formidable, deeply hurting, but also fiercely badass woman who would not hesitate to put him in his place. Um, if it came to it. And does it come to it? You have to read the book to find out. But she is not a sideline figure. None of the women in the book, even the ones who occupy supporting roles, feel like sideline characters. That's another way I think these books have flipped that script. The men are there, and they do important work thematically and structurally. But for me, it's really about the woman.
Yeah, that's the truth. That's the truth with me in my writing, and I always want to stay true to that perspective. I do like writing Brazuca because he's a good guy. He's
Mm-hmm.
like a nice guy just trying to um, connect with this very difficult woman, and because he cares for her, and they have a very complicated relationship. So yeah, so he's pretty fun. I really do enjoy him. I'm not sure technically if I can bring him back given the way that things go,
Mm-hmm.
but I do. I do enjoy him quite a bit, and to show as a foil, right? Just to show how far she is from some sense of normalcy.
Yeah, he does. The space that he and the other men in not just No Going Back, but the entire series, spaces that they occupy feel very informed by telling the story of this incredible woman. It takes a lot, I think, in any genre for a single character to hold interest and suspense and empathy across books, right? That's no small thing. And that's absolutely being achieved here. And
Thank
I'm very
you.
grateful for that. You're
Thank
very
you.
welcome. I'm just waiting now, along with everyone else in this episode, for Nora Watts Part 4, The Advent of the Pool Boy. But before
Okay.
before we get to that, I can't let you leave without playing our game, which is Read, Write, Avoid.
Okay.
So for our regulars at Bios and Bookmarks, you know how this goes. I'm going to present Sheena with what we think is a fun and quirky scenario, and then I'll ask her if she would rather read about it, written by someone else, write about it herself, or avoid the whole thing completely. So, Sheena, your
Mm,
scenario is: would you read, write, or avoid a series of canine crime capers with Whisper the dog as lead detective, faithful pet by day, intrepid gumshoe by night? Each mystery gets solved, and each villain, human or hound, is nabbed.
oh my God, I love this idea so much. So Whisper is one of my favorite creations. She's a nymphomaniac dog, stray dog who wanders into Nora's life, never to really leave, and she's got a huge personality. So I would, because she's her my the scenes with the Whisper are some of my favorite scenes in the whole series. So I would write that.
I love it.
um write that, and maybe it's like a dynamic duo. It's like Whisper and the pool boy, like, go on adventures. I, can we close off the
Yep,
yeah,
absolutely.
okay.
I don't think it's going to get any better than that, folks. We created an entire new sub-series here in the Bios and Bookmarks. You may or may not choose to give us credit for that in your next prolific series. It's going to be award-winning, but we'll know it started right here.
Yeah, Nobel Lit Prize for Literature, here I come, Whisper and the pool
Exactly.
boy.
Thank you so much for being our guest today. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you and to get insight into these phenomenal books. I strongly encourage anyone who has not met Nora Watts, you need to do that. You need to start at the beginning, work your way to No Going Back, and you will want more of her by the time it's over. But they're an incredible journey, and it's one of the best things you can do for your reading life this year.
Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure. Thank you, guys.
You are very welcome. And we have one final episode of this season of Bios and Bookmarks coming up next Sunday. Until then, everyone, Please stay safe and take care of yourselves and each other.